That's when Margaret stepped out from behind my boathouse, clipboard in hand, and I knew my peaceful Saturday morning was about to become a legal nightmare. Let me back up. I bought my lakefront property in 2008. Back when this part of Meadowbrook was still considered the outskirts and the HOA was just a twinkle in some developer's eye. My deed explicitly included exclusive water access rights to a 100-foot stretch of shoreline, complete with dock privileges and a small boathouse that had been grandfathered in since the 1970s. I'd spent 15 blissful years watching sunrises over the water, maintaining my vintage speedboat, and occasionally hosting quiet evenings with close friends. The HOA formed in 2012 around the newer developments inland. And while I technically resided within their boundaries for mail purposes, my waterfront parcel predated every single regulation in their meticulously crafted handbook. I'd confirmed this with my real estate attorney when the HOA first incorporated. I had documentation, I had survey maps. I had everything I needed to prove my little slice of paradise existed in its own legal bubble. Which is why the scene I encountered that Saturday morning felt like a fever dream. I'd driven down to the lake around 9, coffee in hand, planning to spend a few hours sanding down my boat's hull. The sound hit me first loud, classic rock blasting from portable speakers, followed by the unmistakable sizzle and smoky aroma of bacon on a grill. My grill on my dock. I rounded the corner of the boathouse and stopped dead. 7 people, ranging from teenagers to a couple in their 60s, had completely colonized my property. They'd set up folding chairs, a cooler packed with beer, fishing rods propped against my dock posts, and were cooking what appeared to be a full breakfast spread on the Weber grill I kept chained to the dock railing. "Excuse me," I called out, trying to keep my voice friendly despite the adrenaline spike. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. This is private property." The older man at the grill turned, spatula raised like a scepter. "Margaret said we could use the community lake access for the weekend. We drove 6 hours from Ohio. Margaret, of course." Margaret Thornhill had moved into the neighborhood 2 years ago and immediately appointed herself HOA president when the previous one relocated for work. Nobody else wanted the position, so she ran unopposed and treated the role like she'd been elected mayor of a small nation. She lived 4 streets inland, nowhere near the water. In one of those cookie-cutter colonials with a mandatory beige siding and HOA-approved mailbox. "I understand you drove a long way," I said, setting my coffee down on the dock railing, "but this isn't community access. This is my private dock, and it's deeded exclusively to my property. The community doesn't have lake access." A younger woman in a Michigan State sweatshirt frowned. "Margaret sent us GPS coordinates. She said the HOA maintains this area." She was mistaken. Actually, a familiar voice cut through the morning air, sharp and sweet as antifreeze. I wasn't mistaken at all. Margaret emerged from the far side of my boathouse, where she'd apparently been lurking like some suburban horror movie villain. She wore white capris, a nautical striped shirt that felt deliberately untheme, and carried her ever-present clipboard with attached documents protected in plastic sleeves. Her phone was already up, camera lens pointed directly at me. "Good morning, David," she said, her smile never reaching her eyes. "I'm documenting this interaction because we've received complaints about your aggressive behavior toward community members exercising their lakefront privileges." My stomach dropped. "Margaret, these people are trespassing on my property. You know this land predates the HOA." She tapped her clipboard. "According to Section 7, Paragraph 4 of the Meadowbrook HOA Charter, all waterfront access within community boundaries is subject to shared usage rights for the benefit of all residents. Your refusal to comply constitutes a violation of community standards." The Ohio relatives were watching this exchange, like spectators at a tennis match. "That section doesn't apply to grandfathered properties," I said, forcing myself to stay calm. "My deed specifically exempts me." Margaret's smile widened. "We'll see what the board has to say about that." I'll be scheduling an emergency meeting to address your ongoing violations and general lack of community spirit." She turned to her relatives. "I apologize for this unpleasantness. Please continue enjoying your breakfast. This gentleman doesn't speak for the HOA." She walked past me, close enough that I could smell her aggressively floral perfume, and paused just long enough to whisper where only I could hear. "You just made a very expensive mistake." The mooring ropes were slashed clean through, my boat listing dangerously in the water. And Margaret stood in my driveway with 2 board members like she was leading a small militia into battle. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. The first violation notice arrived Monday morning, tucked into my mailbox in a bright yellow envelope that practically screamed official business. Notice of non-compliance. Unapproved dock staining. I'd stained that dock 7 years ago. A rich cedar tone that had weathered beautifully into a silvery gray. According to Margaret's citation, I'd failed to submit form for 7B for exterior structure modifications. The fine was $200, with daily penalties accruing if not remedied within 14 days. I barely had time to process that absurdity before Tuesday brought 3 more notices. Illegal watercraft mooring because my boat supposedly exceeded the HOA's 22-foot length restriction by 6 inches. Unapproved boathouse maintenance because I'd replaced some rotted boards last summer. Improper storage of recreational equipment for keeping my fishing gear in plain view on the dock. By Wednesday evening, I'd received 9 separate violation notices, each more ridiculous than the last. My favorite was excessive waterfront vegetation, citing the natural cattails and reeds that had grown along the shoreline since before the neighborhood even existed. Margaret had clearly spent her weekend buried in the HOA handbook, mining every obscure regulation like she was panning for gold. The accumulated fines totaled over $3,000. Each notice bore her signature in aggressive purple ink, and each included the same threatening final line. "Failure to comply will result in liens against your property and potential legal action." I'd called my real estate attorney Tuesday afternoon. He assured me that none of this would hold up legally, given my grandfathered status, but he'd need to review every notice individually. His hourly rate made my stomach hurt. Margaret was weaponizing bureaucracy, and she knew exactly what she was doing. Even if I won, I'd lose thousands in legal fees. This was warfare by paper cuts. Thursday, I worked late, trying to distract myself with quarterly reports and client meetings. The sun was setting when I finally turned onto my street, painting everything in shades of amber and shadow. That's when I noticed the small crowd gathered at the end of my driveway. 3 figures silhouetted against the dying light, one of them gesturing dramatically toward the lake. My chest tightened. I parked and walked down toward the dock, my work shoes crunching on the gravel path. The scene came into focus like a nightmare gaining resolution. My boat was sitting lower in the water than it should, tilted at an unnatural angle. The mooring ropes that should have been securing it hung limp and severed, dangling into the lake like dead snakes. As I got closer, I could see the damage to the hull, a spiderweb crack running along the starboard side where something had clearly impacted the fiberglass. "There he is," Margaret's voice rang out, shrill and triumphant. The man responsible for creating a navigational hazard in community waters. She stood in my driveway flanked by 2 board members I vaguely recognized from neighborhood holiday parties. It's Tom Chen, a nervous accountant who always looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, and Patricia Desmond, a retired teacher who typically served as Margaret's eager second-in-command. Both of them held clipboards. Both of them avoided eye contact with me. "What the hell happened to my boat?" I demanded, anger overriding the shock. "Your improperly secured vessel has become a safety hazard," Margaret announced, consulting her clipboard like she was reading from a legal brief. "As HOA president, I'm authorized to take immediate action when community members are in danger. We've documented the situation thoroughly. You cut my mooring ropes. It wasn't a question. Your mooring ropes were non-compliant, Patricia chimed in, her voice wavering slightly. Section 9, Paragraph 12 specifies marine-grade nylon in HOA-approved navy blue or forest green. Yours were clearly gray. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline that never came. You have 24 hours to remove this vessel from community waters, Margaret continued, stepping closer. If you fail to comply, the HOA will arrange for removal at your expense, plus storage fees, plus additional fines for each day of continued violation. Tom shifted uncomfortably, finally speaking up. Margaret, maybe we should discuss this with the full board before taking such drastic measures. She silenced him with a look that could have frozen the lake solid. The board delegated emergency powers to the president for exactly these situations. This is happening. My boat, my beautiful 1987 Chris Craft that I'd restored over 3 summers, sat damaged and listing in water that was legally mine. The setting sun glinted off Margaret's phone as she snapped photos, documenting her victory. And I realized with crystal clarity that this wasn't about HOA rules or community standards. This was personal. And it was about to get much, much worse. Margaret's face drained of all color as my attorney displayed the third camera angle, showing her taking a crowbar to my boat's hull. Oh? And that's when she lunged across the conference table and tried to grab his laptop. The gasps that filled the Meadowbrook Community Center meeting room were audible even over the air conditioning's mechanical hum. But let me rewind to how we got there, because the preceding 45 minutes had been their own special kind of theater. I'd spent the previous evening with my attorney, Robert Chen, a sharp-dressed specialist in property law who'd made a comfortable career out of dismantling overreaching HOA boards. He'd reviewed every document I had, including the original 1987 deed, the 2008 property survey, and the 3 doorbell camera videos that had captured far more than I'd initially realized. When he finished, he'd leaned back in his office chair and smiled the way a chess player does when they spot checkmate in 3 moves. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening at 7, giving Margaret exactly the audience she craved. The community center's main room smelled like stale coffee and the lemon cleaner they used on the linoleum floors. Folding chairs had been arranged in theater style, rows facing a long table where Margaret presided over the 5-member board like a judge at sentencing. Tom Chen and Patricia Desmond flanked her, along with 2 other board members I recognized from neighborhood events. Karen Wu, software engineer who always looked vaguely confused during these meetings, and James Mitchell, a retired police officer who typically served as the voice of reason. About 30 residents had turned up for the spectacle, their whispered conversations creating a low buzz of anticipation. Margaret spotted me the moment I walked in with Robert, her expression flickering between surprise and irritation. She clearly hadn't expected me to bring legal representation to what she'd probably imagined would be my public humiliation. "Let's begin," Margaret announced, banging a gavel that seemed comically oversized for the suburban drama at hand. "We're here to address the ongoing violations committed by Mr. David Harrison, whose repeated refusal to comply with community standards has created a safety hazard and divided our neighborhood." She launched into a 15-minute presentation, complete with printed photographs of my dock, my boat, and even the cattails growing along my shoreline. Each image was marked with red arrows pointing to supposed violations. She'd prepared handouts for every board member, each violation meticulously documented with handbook citations and recommended fines. The total had somehow grown to $8,000. Several residents shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Even Patricia was starting to look uncertain. And in conclusion, Margaret said, her voice rising with righteous fury, "Mr. Harrison's belligerent attitude and deliberate disregard for our community's welfare leaves us no choice but to pursue the maximum penalties available under our charter, including potential foreclosure proceedings if these fines remain unpaid." The word foreclosure sent a ripple through the audience. That's when Robert stood, buttoning his suit jacket with deliberate precision. "If I may address the board," he said, his voice calm and measured. "My name is Robert Chen, and I represent Mr. Harrison in this matter. I'd like to present some documentation that I believe will clarify the situation considerably." Margaret's smile tightened. "This is a closed board session for member violations, not a legal proceeding." Actually, James Mitchell interjected. Studying the agenda, our bylaws allow residents to present evidence relevant to their case. I'd like to hear what he has to say. Robert connected his laptop to the projector, and the wall behind the board table lit up with the image of my property deed. The document was crisp and official, bearing the county seal and signatures dating back to 1987. He walked through it methodically, highlighting the property boundaries, the exclusive water rights, and most importantly, the sections that explicitly exempted the parcel from any future homeowners association jurisdiction. The survey map came next, showing in undeniable detail that my waterfront property existed as a legal island within the HOA's boundaries, but not subject to their authority. "This property predates your HOA by 25 years, Robert explained, his tone professorial. "Every violation notice issued to Mr. Harrison is legally invalid. He owes nothing. Your board has no authority over his dock, his boat, or his waterfront access." Margaret's face had gone rigid. "That's not what our legal counsel advised." "Have you consulted legal counsel on this specific property?" Robert asked. The silence stretched. Tom Chen was staring at his hands. Patricia had gone pale. Robert advanced to the next slide, showing a compilation of texts and emails Margaret had sent to various residents, including her Ohio relatives, explicitly stating that the lake access was community property managed by the HOA. Then came the doorbell camera footage. 3 different angles, time-stamped and crystal clear. The first showed Margaret's relatives setting up on my dock. The second showed Margaret herself directing them where to place their chairs. And the third, the one that made several board members lean forward in disbelief, showed Margaret returning to my property late Wednesday afternoon with what was unmistakably a crowbar, spending nearly 20 minutes near my boat before leaving. "This footage has been provided to local police," Robert said quietly. "What we're looking at is criminal trespassing, vandalism, and potentially fraud in her capacity as HOA president. The estimated damages exceed $4,000. Your association is now exposed to a substantial civil lawsuit unless this matter is resolved immediately and appropriately." Karen Wu's hand shot up. "Margaret, did you tell us this property was under HOA jurisdiction?" "The boundaries were unclear." ... "Did you damage his boat?" James demanded, his retired cop instincts clearly activated. Margaret stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is a setup. He's been harassing me since day one, questioning my authority, undermining every decision I make for this community." "Margaret," Tom said softly, "if you lied to us about the property boundaries, the association could be liable." "I didn't lie." Her voice cracked, rising to a near shriek. "That lake belongs to everyone. He doesn't get to hoard it like some selfish..." She stopped mid-sentence, staring at the screen where Robert had advanced to another slide, compilation of her violation notices to me compared to actual HOA records showing nobody else in the neighborhood had received citations for similar issues in 5 years. Selective enforcement, targeted harassment. Each comparison more damning than the last. That's when Margaret's composure finally shattered completely. She lunged across the table, reaching for Robert's laptop with both hands like she could somehow delete reality itself. James caught her arm while Tom jumped back, knocking over his water glass. Patricia actually screamed. Half the audience had their phones out, recording every second of the HOA president's spectacular public unraveling. "You're trying to destroy me," Margaret shrieked, struggling against James's grip. "All of you. This whole neighborhood conspiring against me." Robert calmly closed his laptop and stepped back, letting the board handle their imploding president. And in that moment, watching Margaret being escorted toward the exit by a very disappointed retired police officer, while 30 residents captured her meltdown for posterity, I realized something important. This wasn't over. Not even close.